Joe, and thank you all for being here today. I want to commend, as I've done many times before, Forum Australia for bringing these opportunities together. You'd think that happened a lot outside election campaigns, but they actually don't. There are very few occasions when we can all get into a room, come one, come all, and talk about these issues. And so I want to thank all of those people behind Forum Australia for making this possible. Look, I would say that the most important thing that the next Chief Minister of the ACT has to do is to attempt to restore some of the confidence in the political process, which I think has been withered a bit in the last few years. I think there is, and I'm sure anyone's polled to test this, but I think that the level of confidence people have in governments and politicians tends to be somewhat low at the moment, relatively speaking. And I think it's because, sadly, so many politicians and so many governments have made promises that they haven't kept. And that's particularly happened in respect of the way in which governments make promises that they can afford to pay for. And so I would say to those people who are voting in this election that it's very important that you say to the candidates who put forward promises to you, how do you propose to pay for what you are promising? Because at the end of the day, it's not them who have to pay for the promises that they make, it's you, it's us, the taxpayers, who have to pay for these promises. And you'd think that we'd learnt that lesson and the people were now better educated about saying to governments, well, are you bringing down balanced budgets? Are you keeping debt down? Are you making promises that can be paid for? But unfortunately, the problem is becoming more serious and the gap is probably widening rather than narrowing. At the federal level, for example, at the moment, we are looking at major new national initiatives like a National Disability Insurance Scheme, new investments in education through Gonski, new dental health schemes. But the money that will pay for those things doesn't appear to be there. And so we're entitled as a community to say we're grateful and we're happy that you're putting these things on the table, but you need to explain where they come from. And when they are promised and governments get elected and they're not delivered, then you have the problem that people suddenly see governments making decisions to try and pay for their promises, which have repercussions on the taxpayers themselves. Someone asked a question before about job cuts, and one of the reasons job cuts are happening all over the country at state level and federally, as you pointed out, federally as well, is because governments have realised that the promises they've made can only be paid for either by increasing taxes or reducing spending. And the biggest bill every government faces is the bill for its own employees. It's by far the biggest part of their budgets. Now, I want to put this in a particular context in respect of this ACT election campaign, and that's in respect of the light rail proposal. Back in the early 90s, light rail was on the agenda. Then Labor Deputy Chief Minister David Lamont did supervised major research into this and came back and said, we cannot afford to pay for light rail. It's not going to work. The population's too small, the cost is too high, it won't work. We came to office a year later under Kate Carnell, and we went back over that work to see whether it actually was a rational assessment of the evidence. We concluded that it was. It wasn't going to be affordable. Today, apparently, the ACT government has done the work again and says that it is affordable. But you need to remember, of course, that no public transport system anywhere in the world pays for itself through its patronage. Nobody, by putting that few dollars onto the hands of the ticket collector or whatever, pays for the cost of that public transport system. It's always subsidised by the taxpayer. And so at $600 million, which is the bill, the cost that was announced the other day, that's the cost of construction. Already the Action Bus network costs us tens of millions of dollars in subsidies beyond what's collected in fares each year. The question has to be asked, how much will it cost and where will it come from? And I have to say, having looked at this question before from opposition and then in government, I'm still very doubtful about how affordable it is to the ACT community. And so I'd say to you, as taxpayers and voters, you're entitled to demand a high amount of information from parties promising to deliver a light rail system. Because if they don't explain where the dollars are coming from, you're entitled to assume they're coming from your pockets by way of higher subsidies into the future. It is important that as governments we look at the way in which services are delivered and what that does to the quality of life of people lead in a city. I've just done a survey over several thousand Canberra households, and I had 5,000 people answer the survey that I put out. And I had an overwhelming response from people that the cost of living in the ACT is rising faster than the income that people are receiving. It particularly recorded rates increases as really hitting them hard, and they recorded the cost of government services are going up and utilities are costing more. 85% more in the last few years for the cost of power, not quite as large but similar cost increase for gas, and those costs impact directly on the quality of life that people lead. People told me in this survey that they're going backwards, that their quality of life is declining. Now, if governments can't fund the promises that they make, you can be absolutely assured that that decline in living standards will continue. Because ultimately governments look to do something to stop that gap widening, try and bring that gap between spending and revenue back under control. And it either means new or higher taxes, such as rates, or it means that they have to make big cuts in the quality of services or the number of people that they employ. And that's the reality of what's happening across the board. Right now, the federal government, the Gillard government, is facing that reality, and there are, in this present budget, 4,400, this year's budget, 4,400 federal public service jobs which are disappearing because of that gap. And on the projections of the Canberra Times and their analysis, that will widen to a total of 12,000 jobs over the next 3 years. So it is a serious problem, and it's why it's in all our interests as consumers, as taxpayers, that we hold governments to account for the promises that they make. I'll finish just by making a comment on Andrew Barr's admission that way back in the early 1990s that the Labor Party was wrong to oppose the closing of schools that was being carried out then. I was the Education Minister. I was in the firing line for those decisions. And that's another indicator of the kind of issue that was being faced by the Territory then. We had a very, very good provision of schools across the Territory. Every suburb had its own government primary school, and then we had secondary schools as well. It was a model that couldn't be sustained as population densities went down. But we tried to do something about it, and it wasn't. It was blocked by the then Labor opposition. I'm very glad that Andrew has sort of acknowledged that that was the wrong position to take. I'm just sorry that it took more than 21 years to get the admission that me losing my job as Education Minister in 1991 was unjustified. But that's another story. I'd simply say to you as educated voters, we have a very high degree of education in this city, and people are politically literate. Make those points known, ask those questions, get those facts on the table so that we aren't opening up a whole series of further attacks on living standards in the Territory for the next 4 years. Thank you.